Hey all, welcome back to LIS 570. This is going to be our last lecture. I'm going to briefly talk about some important topics that I want to make sure that you take away from the course, and then we'll wrap up by saying what are a couple of other courses that you can take in library and information science at the iSchool, which have to do with methods and ways of knowing. And then I'll offer a couple of topics that I think are important to keep your eyes on as you move forward thinking about either research you want to do or topics you want to specialize as you go out into the professional world. All right, so let's jump in. So here really in one slide is all the things that I think are important that at a minimum you take away from the class. So the first is that we talked about this idea that ways of knowing are really wrapped up in the beliefs that we hold about the world, ways that we reason about what constitutes things such as reality or verifiable knowledge or how we go about knowing. And we said, of course, that things like our ontological and our epistemic commitments could be boiled down to sort of what we think about valid knowledge consisting of. And epistemology tends to think of justified knowledge as being true, justified beliefs. That is, we believe something to be the case, we're justified in those beliefs, and we end up having some argument that the things that we believe and the justifications that we have lead us to some true conclusions. Now, we also talked about how we put that kind of general, vague idea into an operational framework. And that operational framework often moved from something like a theory to a specific set of examples, or it moved from, say, a specific set of observations up to a theory. And these two branches of empirical research we called either deduction, moving from the general to the specific, or induction, that is, moving from the specific to the general. Okay, we also, in the last week of class, came up with this kind of framework which sits maybe between the deductive and the inductive ways of reasoning, and that is abduction. And we said that instead of going the careful route of thinking about how a set of observations makes a pattern and how that pattern confirms a hypothesis and that hypothesis leads to a theory, instead we said, well, we can kind of move from a set of observations to a theory about the ways that those work, and then we can design some tests, or we can build some artifacts and try to put that theory into the world and test its efficacy. And this is the process of reasoning about the world through abduction or abductive processes. And this is oftentimes tied very closely to design-based research. Okay. Now, along the way, we've talked about this idea of moving from, say, our intuition to the design of research to the collecting of data and analyzing that data and then writing our data up. But governing all of this work is what we've talked about as research ethics. That is, we have a set of principles we operate from, and regardless of, say, our paradigm of research or our epistemic or our ontological commitments, we believe that there's a certain rightness and wrongness to the ways that we can have intentions about the research that we're doing. And so those intentions should be guided or shaped by, say, doing work that's to the beneficence of the communities that we're working for. That is, that we have some benefit that we're offering to the people that we're asking to be enrolled in our research. Our research should be about justice in some broad, significant way. And this can be applied to, say, abstract ideas like who should be the benefit of our research to the kinds of questions that we ask if they're having true and, say, meaningful impact in the communities that they're meant to serve. But most importantly, at least on the kind of practical level that we're talking about designing and readying ourselves to do research, is what we might call community concern or respect for persons. And that has to do with how well, one, people can understand and really get on board with giving their consent to participating in our project. And two, how they understand what the ramifications of their consent and their participation really will be carried out. So what we have in terms of a respect for persons is not only that we'll take up the time that's required in order to do our work and nothing more, but that we have a clear line and a repeated line of informed consent in order to carry out the work that we intend to do with human subjects. All right, now kind of my golden rule, which I've tried to impart on you all along really, is that there's a number of jargon, concepts, theoretical constructs, which we can use to talk about the complexity of carrying out empirical research. But a lot of it boils down to being careful and diligent about the way that we record our assumptions. That is, we have some transparency about what we think is the case and how we go about getting evidence that that thing is the case. And a lot of this documentation and recording comes down to what we might call reflexivity, right? How it is I think I know, and how it is you maybe make an argument about what you know. These types of ways that we make descriptions to one another, or we propose and have claims about what we know, are really about the diligence that we have in designing and speaking clearly or communicating about what we think we know and how we think we know it. So I have to give you kind of one thing to take away from the class. It's maybe nothing that's all heady and maybe even all that complex. It's to be reflexive, to document the processes in which you gather and analyze data, and to, in the simplest terms, describe what we think we know and the limitations of that knowing. And sometimes that can be as simple as, this is how I measured a certain thing, and this is what I found. And other times it can be really complex with, this is a theory and an idea, and this is how I operationalized it, and this is why it does or does not hold in the case that I'm particularly looking at. Now, even though we have these kind of simple terms in which we can design and carry out research, there's a number of things that we can do to ensure that we're acting ethically and that we're coming up with valid, reliable knowledge. We tend to talk about these as a group in the general sense of validity constructs. And we talked about, in particular, two types of validity checks that we can do in the kind of social science research that most of us are going to be involved in. And that's internal validity and external validity. And we can think of internal validity being about how carefully we design and how we have ethical approval to do the research that we are purporting to go out and do. And externally valid research is how well we can generalize about the kinds of things that we hope that we know. And we can gain some external validity by comparing our results to other people's, but also by asking the participants that are a part of our research to validate and to help come to some conclusion that seems maybe aligned with what types of things they believe and what they think is reflective about their lives and the experiences that they've had that have informed our work. So hopefully this isn't the only lecture that you've watched, but if it is, this is kind of what is at the very core, the very minimal that we hope that you're going to carry forward for the rest of the program. Now, there's tons of other resources that are locked up in this course, and some of them are captured in the readings that we did, but a lot of it's captured in the other videos, the other lectures that we have, and the other course notes. So as I've talked about all along, part of the commitment to you in a LIS program from an instructor like me is that these kinds of resources are going to be persistent and continuously available. Whether you drop out of the program next quarter or whether you go through completion and take a job and are in this field for the next 25 years, which I hope you all are. But if you do, right, you can always return to these resources. As long as the web's going to exist, or as long as I'm at the University of Washington, these resources will stay up. So you can return to them at any time, dip back into and figure out things about, say, maybe a validity construct, or maybe what exactly it is we mean by deduction when we're doing quantitative research. Okay, some other classes that you might be interested in taking if research is something that you really want to pursue, either as a part of your job or as a part of your training at the iSchool. So here I've listed some kind of strict methodological courses. Some of these things are around either design methods or legal research. Others are additional methods adjacent classes that you can take, which are LIS specific. These are things like metadata design and metadata for interactive media, things like the introduction to data science, which is going to be a little bit more statistical and computational thinking. There's also, and I want to make a big plug for these because I think they're some of the most fun you can have in courses at the iSchool, are research seminars, which are often under the number LIS 578, and special topics, which is when a professor like me sometimes gets the latitude to design something that's brand new and introduce a new topic. So those fall under the course of LIS 598. And if I were you and I were signing up for classes, LIS 598 would usually be the first thing that I look at, because it's going to be the kind of interesting emergent topics, but it's also going to be what instructors are most enthused and most excited to teach. Okay, and a couple of other, I guess, parting shots here about the course. Some things that I think we didn't cover topically, but are important to keep your eye on and continue to think about as you move through this program and think about the ways in which you're going to interact with, say, a profession of either librarianship or archiving or information professionals more generally. So some long-standing issues continue to be persistent, and they continue to be a kind of quagmire. They are wicked hard problems for us to overcome as a community. These have to do with, I think, things that we're seeing right now in this particular moment. The privacy of our online identities or our real life identities, how this ties ourselves into public health systems, or how this ties us into legal systems. Internet access is a problem that's persistent and not going to go away. We have things like a broadband gap, which has been around since at least the late 90s and continues to be a persistent problem. The other one that is tricky and is not going to go away, is only going to get more complicated, is our ideas around ownership in digital spaces. So maybe this is a library that's lending ebooks and has a set limited number of licenses, or maybe it's even just the fact that we're moving towards almost streaming every type of digital media that we have. So these longstanding issues are things that will persist, and undeniably in 20 years we'll come back to this class, it'll be the same set of problems. But there's also some emergent problems that I think are worthy of our attention and are particularly salient at this moment in time. These are things like mis and disinformation in online communities. The sharing and the spread of viral information only amplifies and quickens the pace at which we can tell or inform one another about things, and this only heightens our ability to be misinformed or disinformed. So you'd probably be able to participate in lots of research projects in the iSchool over the next few years that are going to deal specifically with this topic. The others are maybe a little bit more abstract, but I think will continue to be important things over the next 2 to 3 years. And that's going to be around what are typically things like centralized web and mobile applications, like a Facebook or a Twitter, moving to what are considered decentralized web applications or decentralized mobile applications. This means that there's not sort of one center authority that's going to run every application, but there's going to be a whole set of people that are maybe running servers and that have the ability to exert more governance and control over particular applications. So if you think about a platform like Twitter, which has a company behind it, there's another set of technologies called something like Mastodon, and these have no one behind it. It's a matter of collective action of keeping a network open. And I think in particular, as we come to, say, crises around mis and disinformation, we'll continue to see decentralized web and mobile applications rise in popularity. All right, and then the last one is going to seem also really abstract, but the provenance of digital artifacts is something that library and information science is going to have a huge role to play in. We can think about this as what's being talked about in the news media right now is deepfakes, right? The ability to take and manipulate what might be audio or video, but we can think about there's any kind of digital spoofing or any kind of digital manipulation of artifacts. Those always leave a trace, and what people that are information scientists have long been very good at is understanding what the legacy and history of an object actually looks like. So as those issues come to the fore in both political and entertainment arenas, I think those are going to be really interesting, fun things for us to try to, and important things for us to try to unfurl. All right, so that's kind of it for the course. I want to thank you for your time and attention. I also want to thank you for all of the effort you've given. And I hope that you've had a good experience. I would encourage you to reach out and let your TAs know if you have. They've worked really, really hard this quarter, and they're really invested in being that connection between me and you. And so if you've had at all a good time, it's in part because they've worked so hard. So please, your TAs get so little love. Please drop them a note, tell them how much you appreciate them, and we'll see you around. Thanks.